Jen Kentrup began her yoga practice in the 1990s and became a devoted practitioner in 2006 in Hong Kong with her primary teachers Patrick Creelman and Rinat Perlman. Jen taught for many years at Pure Yoga in Hong Kong, not to be mistaken with Pure Yoga, Texas. Jen loves teaching asana, pranayama, and meditation, grounded in tradition. She loves to explore the intersection of various lineage practices and modalities. Jen describes yoga as the art of paying attention. She teaches workshops, intensives, teacher trainings, and hosts an annual retreat in Kathmandu, Nepal. She is a long-term meditator and credits the practice as the foundation of her teaching. And it is her direct experience that the practice enhances our ability to sit with what is, cultivating resilience, compassion, and ultimately insight. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
All right, happy to have you here on Pure Yoga Talk, where we explore the unique paths of yoga teachers and practitioners all over the world. And we believe that through this unique storytelling, we can inform and inspire practitioners to deepen their practice or simply stay the course. Now, you have, Jen, such a wide range of yoga asana experience from many modalities, systems, and teachers. So let me ask, what is your favorite yoga pose today and why?
Okay, I thought you were going to ask this question, and it's a hard question to answer, but I'll answer it two ways. I have my favorite to teach and my favorite to practice. My favorite pose to teach, and this is almost all the time, is downward dog. And one of the reasons why I love teaching it is because there are ways to teach it that give students an experience that they've never had. And a lot of that is using hands-on or using props. And it's one of those opportunities to have an aha moment, which is really lovely. That's my favorite pose to teach. My favorite pose to practice right now is, it's called Supta Padangusthasana. And you lie down and you take one leg up vertically, you take a strap over, and it's extension of the legs with the back of your body on the floor.
All right. And why? Why that one today?
It's really grounded. You have the feedback of the whole back of your body on the floor and the feedback of your foot in the strap. And it's strong. The lower body is in full extension, but the upper body is soft. It's kind of a combination of everything we do in asana, where there's a softening, an extension, but a full body awareness with the floor to feel yourself against the floor and the strap.
Wow. Yeah. That's what I love about you, Jen. I've taken some of your classes and you're always so grounded in like the technique, the alignment, the awareness of what one is to feel in a posture. You understand yoga poses on a very deep, profound level. That's what I can really appreciate about your teaching. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go a little bit into your yoga journey. Let's tell us about your first class. When was that? And more importantly, what was it about that yoga class or teacher that made you come back?
Okay, so it was in the 90s. It was actually last century. Isn't that crazy? It was in the 90s. Yeah. It was in the 90s, and my next door neighbor was a painter, this lovely woman, and she lived in a loft that had these uneven floors, and it smelled like thinner, and she did all her oil paintings there, and she started teaching yoga. And at the time, I don't think she'd done any certification at all. I don't know what the story was, but she was teaching yoga. So I went next door and I practiced with her. And I only realized almost a decade later that what she was teaching was Kundalini, because what we did was a lot of breath work and a lot of arm work. So we held our hands in sort of a claw shape. And with the eyes closed, the arms went up and down and up and down and up and down. And I think we were meant to do this for about 3 minutes. And after, I don't know, 30 seconds or a minute, my arms were dead. You know, and I remember kind of sneaking a peek, like opening one eye and seeing her, and she was just the whole time, you know, steady, on, focused, and I was dying. So right then and there, I thought, okay, she's tapping into something that I want to know what it is. Something struck me that there was something more about what we were doing than just arm strength or breath work. There was something there, and then that was it. I was interested. It
Interesting.
started the whole thing.
Wow. And now, prior to that, or concurrent with that, were you into athletics or dance or anything like that? Like, was this something that you just stumbled upon and it turned out to be this physical modality that you enjoyed?
I mean, I was a snowboarder. I was active, but I didn't have any sort of regimented or regular activity. This was really the beginning of something that was consistent and recurrent.
Hmm. Hmm. So then that's what launched you on your yoga path, your yoga journey. So tell
Yeah.
us more how then it evolves over time.
Well, it was very inconsistent, and but I was interested. And then a few years later, well, a little while later, we ended up leaving New York, and I moved to Hong Kong, and I had kids. And then it was this sort of situation where I had two young kids, and I remember my husband was like, maybe you should try yoga. You know, it was one of those, and I was like, yeah, I think you're right. And it was kind of, you know, what is going to help me sort of get back to myself? And I remembered, you know, oh yeah, I did yoga before and it was interesting. And I was never quite sure exactly what it was, but I kind of stepped back in and at Pure Yoga. And instantly I felt I was part of a community, and that the practice itself was a way for me to come back to myself. And then very quickly it became I became a devoted practitioner, and this was something that I wanted to pursue on a regular basis.
Hmm. And so this is in Hong Kong, and
Hmm.
it's at Pure Yoga Hong Kong,
Hmm.
and you were there for over 20 years, right? 20,
22. Yeah.
22 years. So maybe what, 2000?
I got there in 2000 and we came back in 22.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So then tell us a little bit more then about Pure Yoga in Hong Kong. And I know of Patrick Creelman. I
Right.
don't know him personally, but I know he was very, very, very famous in the Bikram yoga world back in the 90s. He was like
Well,
right before Jason Wynn became like the superstar, he was like the first superstar, right?
well, I think he did his Bikram training in 2000,
Oh,
if I'm correct. I think so. And he opened a studio in Vancouver in 2001. That was a Bikram studio. And then I think after a year, he moved to Hong Kong. And when he opened Pure in Hong Kong, it was Bikram only. And he brought a whole bunch of teachers from Canada and the United States. And it basically introduced the original hot yoga into Hong Kong. And they started with one branch, quickly opened to two. And now, these days, 23 years later, 24 years later, I think they have 15 studios in Hong Kong. I think there are last there were three or four in Shanghai. There are a few in Beijing. There's some in Singapore. So it really sort of spread throughout Asia.
yeah. And then and over those years, a lot of other yoga styles and methods and practices were brought in to
That's
Hong
right.
Kong. So Hong Kong, Pure Yoga Hong Kong has really transformed and blossomed into really an epic, yoga center that's very internationally well known, right?
Well, that's right. For years, they hosted the Asia Yoga Conference and brought in teachers from around the world, like really world renowned. And they still, Pure is a home for traveling teachers. So the international yogis that sort of do the whole circuit. Everyone comes through Pure. So during my time in Hong Kong, I was really lucky to have the experience of practicing with many, many, many teachers as they made their way down through China and through Hong Kong and through Asia. So
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah, I would say that you were very, very lucky to be there during that growth period and to one, observe the growth, but to be able to participate and really just inhale that much knowledge and teaching, because especially because India is just a hop, skip, and a jump away, sort
Yeah.
of, a little closer than from where we are here in Texas. And I remember because Marty and I, my wife and I, we used to always travel to Hong Kong starting in 2009. From 2009 to 2016, we would go there at least, maybe a total of like a month out of every year, and we would always practice at Pure Yoga Hong Kong. And it was a great opportunity for us who are really entrenched in the original hot yoga world to be able to go and try all kinds of different practices and be an anonymous student, which was really, really fun for us. And
Yeah.
that was our yoga home away from home. And it was
I know.
great.
I like to think that we must have been in the same lift together at one point or another.
Had to
We've
have
been
been.
in the same class.
That's right, without knowing. And so tell us then more about your teacher, more about your journey. When did you start your teacher trainings and that whole part?
From 2005, roughly onward, I was really a devoted student. Several times a week, many times a week, and then I decided to really take it slow before taking a teacher training. I started off doing my teacher at the time, Patrick and Rinat, were both within the Anusara School, which was a school that was founded by a teacher named John Friend, who had studied with Mr. Iyengar. So it was a school that was very, very rooted in the alignment tradition, but also very rooted within the tantric universality and cosmology, so that teachers really had to have a very thorough understanding of the philosophical underpinnings as well as the physiological alignment in asana. So I started my first teacher training. Oh, so I'm sorry. Before my teacher training, I started doing intensives. They were Anusara intensives, where Patrick was bringing in the philosophy and beginning to unpack what really underlies the physical practice. So I had a little bit of a philosophical underpinning before I took my first teacher training, which was in 2013. And at the time, Ana Forrest was coming through Hong Kong and offering a 30-day training. I think we had one day off. And it sort of fell in the calendar in the right place at the right time. And although she was not a teacher I had ever practiced with, and really I didn't know the first thing about her particular school of yoga, I decided, okay, I'm in. The timing works, I'm in. And it was fascinating because her style is very different than what I had been practicing. And her approach is very different than what I had been studying. She, at the time, teaches no philosophy at all. So at the time, she was associated or had associated herself with the Native American traditions, was a medicine woman, and her teachings were very grounded in the four directions and I think it was the Lakota tribe. I don't recall. But it was really a step outside of my comfort zone. I will say that although the yoga was not something that I've really maintained in my practice, she was an incredibly effective teacher teaching us how to teach. And a lot of her methodology I have adopted and I teach within my own trainings because I really came out of that, and a lot of us did, with a really firm grasp on how to deliver material, how to embody the teachings, and how to really look at your students in a way so that you're able to energetically transmit the heart of this practice.
And you probably spent a lot of time on your hands in her classes, right? A lot of
Well,
inversions and lots of crunches.
okay, so the two things that really stand out, we did abs
For days.
for days and days and days. And then there's a pose, it's called Agni Stambhasana in Sanskrit, or double pigeon, where you sit with your legs like this. And, although I tend to sort of shy away from, when I first started yoga, I couldn't da 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 da. But when I first started this, I remember the agony of sitting in that pose. Just the sheer, my hips, like just such discomfort. And we would sit in that shape and do pranayama for forever. And at the end of that training, my hips were so open and I felt so light and buoyant that it's one of those experiences where you have this, like, the proof is in the pudding. Like, this works. So, it was an incredible experience. I'm really
Nice.
grateful to have had the
Nice.
opportunity to train with her.
So that's in 2013, and you
Yeah.
finished that with Ana Forrest, 30 days straight, intensive. And then what was next?
Well, then I started teaching, and again, I took it slow. I really felt like I think teaching is one of those things where the only way to get better at teaching is teaching. And before I looked for a job, I spent a year asking all my friends who were yogis if I could teach them. So I went around to everyone's houses and I really started working with bodies and working in different environments and working on creating a sequence and figuring out, what do I do when the doorbell rings, and, what do I do when someone's late, and all this sort of fine tuning the mechanistic part of teaching, but also the teaching itself. And then it was probably about a year and a half later, I got a job at a studio. And maybe 2 or 3 years later, when I started working at Pure, which is what had been my home since 2005, which was
Wow.
really lovely.
And was that so? Tell me then about at Pure in Hong Kong. How would the and mostly there was an international audience there, but primarily people from Hong Kong, right? Cantonese and Asians. So tell me what's different about like the Asian student, and you could be very honest because I'm one of them, and kind of the typical Western student. Tell me about East versus West.
Okay. Well, generally speaking, in my experience, Asian women in particular, because they make up a large part of the population of yogis, are more flexible than Western women and men. And that can be an asset and a deficit, because oftentimes, if you are not strong and you are very flexible, then you sort of can lean into your flexibility rather than the combination of strength and flexibility, or just strength. And a lot of Westerners, as you know, can be quite strong. You have guys come in that are quite strong and they tend to be less flexible. So as a Western woman, I was not born super flexible. I can count on one hand the number of times I've been able to get into the full splits, Hanumanasana. It's not in my DNA, shall we say.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said for practicing in a room where you're one of the tightest students in the room, as opposed to walking in and being strong and being flexible. It was my experience that I was always kind of on the back end. It took me a while to really get to the point. Yeah. It took me a while to get to the point where I was in my body enough to be able to work with clarity and find myself, getting better in the poses.
Mm-hmm. Now, how
Yeah.
about you said mostly the students were women, so there were not a lot of Asian men that were into yoga. Was that like not part of the culture there, would you say?
I don't think that's it so much. I think generally speaking, yoga tends to attract more women
Hmm.
overall. I think the culture of Hong Kong, well, the culture of Hong Kong from the point of view of an expat is that a lot of men make up the workforce. Expat men make up the workforce in Hong Kong. And as a result, you have a large population of women who are parenting or have their own thing going, but a lot of free time. So it really is a culture that's kind of ripe to offer yoga to a whole community of expat women that are interested in practice and have the time and the flexibility and the ability to attend class.
Hmm.
So in that sense, it was a home for a lot of us because not everyone can work because of work visas, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a really, really strong community, a really nice group of people.
Hmm. Now, in Hong Kong, what were your favorite classes to take, and
Uh-huh.
what were your favorite classes to teach?
Well, Patrick, by the time I really started practicing with him, he was still Anusara, which is very heavily alignment based. And then during the time that we spent together up until 2022, he had sort of transitioned into more of a traditional Iyengar teaching style. And basically, what that means is that looking at each pose as a piece of architecture, starting with whatever is on the ground and aiming to build this structure, as you will, um, with the clarity in order to become stable. So, considering that there is an optimal blueprint in which to place our hands or place our feet or put anything on the ground, and then building the pose from the ground up, creating clarity in the body of action so that every part of your body is doing something, even in what appears to be a static pose. So there's really this illumination of the body in each pose so that the mind is fully present. And that's the way I teach as well. So it's really the alignment practice that speaks to me as a teacher and a practitioner.
Hmm. Great. And I've heard this quote from Leslie Kaminoff, the author of Yoga Anatomy, and he's like a real, sports scientist. And he said in yoga poses, he'd rather that a lot of muscles do a little bit of work than a handful of muscles doing a lot of work. And if you spread the work a little bit more evenly across the body, which takes a lot more connection,
Uh-huh.
maybe, then you've got a stable pose that you can keep repeating and is going to be healthy for you in the long term. So he was very much into that, into an aspect of alignment, another aspect of alignment, and that was
Mhm.
his view. And
Yeah,
it's interesting.
the way I think about it, and I use this description in class a lot, is that when I was a kid, there was a Tropicana orange juice commercial, and it was an outline of a man, and he sort of walked out and onto a stage and looked up, and there was a hose, and a hand sort of came and turned the dial, and he opened his mouth, and it started filling him up with orange juice, and it filled him up from his feet up to his knees, all the way up to the top of his head, and then he was orange. And to me, that's kind of the description of what we want to do in class. We're looking to be able to answer two questions. Where is every part of our body and what is it doing?
Mhm.
And the clarity of that is like, I mean, it sounds very picky, but in some ways, when you're practicing, it's really just becoming fully present. So it's like, are my fingers spread and my hands pushing into the floor? Are my arms straight? Are my legs straight? Can I soften my breath? Can I relax here? Doing something throughout the body to become present, because ultimately that is the nature of the practice, to
Right.
be fully present.
Yeah. So then that's wonderful. How about then let's move on from Hong Kong. So then you're there and and life is going great, right? You have your kids are now in their teens, high school, I guess. And then 2022, boom, yeah, stuff tumbles down and tell us how
The world
you
shuts
launched
down.
over, jump back over to the States.
Yeah. So, being in Hong Kong for COVID was interesting because we were really living in the future. Uh, we had it first in China, um, we were watching the rest of the world react, but Hong Kong locked its doors very quickly. So, whereas even though it came from Asia, in Hong Kong, we had these very rigid measures and lockdowns. The studios were open for a while. We had all sorts of iterations of mask wearing, spacing students out. Things got further and further apart, and then eventually the studio shut down. But after 2.5 years of COVID, where we had these very restrictive measures, but we really had no COVID. I think for the first 2.5 years, we had less than 1,000 cases in Hong Kong. We decided that because we hadn't been able to make a trip back to the United States to see friends and family, that we were going to just move, get up and go. And rather than move back to the East Coast where we're both from, we decided that we wanted to make an adventure of the whole thing. So we picked Austin and landed here not knowing anyone or anything about Austin, really. I was given the name of one studio, and that was Pure Yoga. So in my very first week, when we landed here, I knocked on your door and came in, and it was my second original hot yoga class ever, and that was a little over 2 years ago. And in the last 2 years, original hot yoga has become my primary practice. So it's been a completely new, humbling experience for me.
Wow. Yes, and I still remember the day 2 years ago. That day, that moment that you came in, introduced yourself, because I think you met Marty
I
first.
did.
You did, and then finally one day you come in and I get to meet you, and then we made some of these connections back to New York City and then Hong Kong, and then it's like, wow, well, welcome, and we hope we made you feel welcome, and and we're certainly thrilled that original hot yoga has now become part of your life. So tell us about your first class. I think it was in Hong Kong, right? Because when Marty and I would visit Hong Kong, we would chase down Missy, Christian, and Noi. They were, certified Bikram yoga teachers, and we would go there and just like, oh yeah, this feels comfortable. In addition to trying out some of these other classes, so
Right.
you had a good relationship and good rapport with them, right?
Well, I taught in the hot room for many, many, many years, but I was not teaching 26 and 2. So I was teaching hot hatha and hot vinyasa. And I will say that the thing about Hong Kong versus Austin, Texas, is that Austin is crazy hot, but it's dry hot.
Yeah.
And Hong Kong is not quite as temperature hot, but it's humid hot. And so I was used to heat, but teaching in the hot room, I always enjoyed teaching in the hot room, but it was never a practice that I sought out. And I have to admit, I was scared of practicing in the hot room. It makes me kind of dizzy, and it wasn't my thing. But then Missy sort of convinced me to come to her class, and I had never practiced the 26 and 2 sequence, and it's so doable, as opposed to hot vinyasa, which I just think it can be really, really exhausting. That many vinyasa, and it can be a lot. But I think there's something kind of magical about the original sequence that pushes you to just a certain point and then kind of backs off. You know, there's I found it interesting, and then when I came here, you know, because I had that experience, I felt at home in your studio, and it really, and similar to what I was used to. There's a great community, and I felt welcome, and it was just really nice.
Nice. Yeah. And it's been a joy to have you at our studios. It's always great. I remember the first couple of times you came in and took my class, and I felt nervous because I knew that you're this, big shot, pure yoga teacher in Hong Kong, and you're very intelligent, and I wanted to make an impression. I wanted to, but then what I just did was I just taught the class that I always teach because that's the comforting thing. I also think about original hot yoga. It's the same thing, and there's comfort in that. And as you said, you mentioned it pushes you a little bit to the edge, and then you're just right there. And actually, it's you push yourself right to that edge. You take yourself to the edge where you can be on any given day, and that goes for any single student that's in there. And what I really appreciate about original hot yoga, it's a one room classroom.
Mm.
It can be people of all ages, conditions, you know, feelings, emotions, and everybody will get exactly what they need from that class that day, and then rinse and repeat the next day and the next day. And that's the beauty of it, the simplicity and the elegance in that simplicity.
Yeah, there's something very, very intelligent about the sequence. And for me, you know, it was incredibly humbling because I watched Rose Vaughan,
Rose Aaron Vaughn, yeah.
Rose Aaron, and you know, she was saying, you know, she was just like, she'd won all these awards, and then she went into and practiced the Hot 26 and 2, and she couldn't do standing head to knee.
Yeah.
And you know, my practice, you know, I've been practicing for over a decade, and it is very humbling and fascinating to start something from the beginning.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, as adults, it's rare that we find ourselves in the position of learning. You know, we tend to get to a point in our life where we know what we know, and until you are stuck like assembling something from IKEA, there's not a lot of learning that we actively seek out. And so for me, it's been this journey of what in the world is this practice, and how does it relate to my personal practice, and what I've spent now, a long time, and over a decade studying and living into, and what are the intersections and connections there. And that's been a really interesting journey for me as well.
Nice. Jen, in our conversation thus far, you've mentioned Iyengar yoga and Anusara yoga as two modalities that have strongly influenced not just your practice, what you've been drawn to, but also your teaching and your teaching style. They've influenced your teaching style. I've taken your alignment based classes, and they're very, very unique. Tell us what that can offer to, Austin, Texas.
I think there are three components. The first is that I'm teaching from a library of poses that come from a lineage. So, Light on Yoga, which was written by Mr. Iyengar, is sort of a compendium of poses that I generally stay pretty true to. So there's forms and descriptions of the poses, and that's my sort of go-to. So I'm referencing a lineage practice in the physical postures. The second part is that because of my training and my interest, I really tend to do my best to ground my teachings within some aspect of philosophy. And that can be simply a description of what we're doing on a very fundamental level, which is we're looking to quiet the mind and how we can do that. I sort of try and weave in philosophy in a way that feels authentic. The third part is that I genuinely believe that the asana practice is not meant, I have to be careful how I say this, it's not meant to feel good. And that's not saying that it's meant to feel terrible, because I don't think that at all, or even feel bad. But it is an opportunity to experience discomfort, agitation, difficulty. There was this monk in the 17th century named Shantideva, and some of his teachings were about reframing our attitude toward discomfort, and how discomfort is a teaching for us. And Mr. Iyengar was known as a very strict disciplinarian, a very strict teacher. And anyone that's taken a pure Iyengar class knows that it can be extremely rigid, and it can be quite dry at times. But I think that the opportunity to spend time in inquiry in our body to find out what the lineage practice can offer is an opportunity for self-examination. So one of the things that we're seeking in yoga is the truth. And that's like capital T, the truth. Ultimately, we're seeking the truth of our being. But there's lots of little truths that we can sort of find along the way. In other words, is our arm straight? Very simply, is our arm straight? And if it's not straight, can we make it straight? And so this inquiry into ourselves, when we're working with a template, the class itself is meant to be a laboratory. It's an opportunity to be with yourself in a whole variety of situations so that you can work with your mind to create a more equanimous state, equanimity, to cultivate compassion, to create tenacity. And I feel like when we work in such a way where there's some difficulty, that's when you're working with fertile soil. So I think that my classes tend to verge just on the border of a level 1 and a level 2. I like to sort of push into a level 2 territory a little bit. And the level of challenge is there, but very much grounded in this lineage practice of these traditional poses. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Yes,
Okay.
it does. And yoga, often referred to as the science of the mind, right? In training the mind, I feel like sometimes asana practice should be seen as finding some discomfort and being uncomfortable so that the mind can process that discomfort and work itself through. And if we don't have discomfort, then it's not challenging the mind in a way.
Oh, I agree 100%. I mean, the resiliency that we build by being in a safe space like a yoga studio and facing ourselves in these moments, this is the practice. This is take your yoga off the mat. If you can find yourself in a deep twist, for example, where your breath is compromised and you can't actually see your body because you're looking away from your body and you're unstable, and you can just stay and begin to cultivate these things. This is the practice. This is the beauty of the asana practice.
Yeah. And where do you find the word? Is there any room for the word play in your class?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I love to play. I mean, as much as I stick to the traditional poses, a lot of what I include in my classes are things that are, well, I use a lot of props. So there are things that get us toward the poses. They're not necessarily poses themselves, but there are things that we can do with blocks that that open the body in some way. And yeah, I think as soon as you're approaching a pose that you're not sure of, or maybe you've never done before, as long as you're being safe, then the attitude of play makes it fun. I mean, I think an asana class, or at least I hope that my classes are challenging and fun
Yeah.
and serious and a whole bunch of other things, but fun is definitely
Yeah.
definitely part of a class. I like to think that I can be kind of funny sometimes too.
Yeah. They are fun. And the purpose of one of our spaces in our Austin studio downtown, we call it the Treehouse. And the Treehouse is the yoga space that's upstairs right in the trees, and you have to take a flight of stairs to go up there. And it's a place, the Treehouse is a place where you can connect to the roots of your yoga lineage, and you have the room and the space and the freedom to learn, to build, and to play. And when we have a space like that and you fit perfectly into that space, it gives, the student all this room to discover, themselves, the science of the mind. Um,
I agree. And, I think that the most interesting thing for me, having taken up the original hot yoga practice, is really seeing that although the practices are very different, you're dealing with 26 and 2. I have a huge library of poses. You can point to many, many, many differences, including the names of poses.
mhm.
But as different as they are, they're ultimately pointing to exactly the same thing.
That's right.
And what I find so fascinating is, in the hot practice, you're staring at your eyes in a mirror. You're in the heat. You're doing the same sequence again and again and again. And in the alignment class, you're not staring at anything.
Yeah.
The practice is new every different time, and there's no heat. So the challenge is slightly different. You walk into the hot room, and instantly you're aware of your skin. You're aware of the limitations of your body. In an alignment class, you kind of have to find that in another way. So it's like doing the same thing, but coming at it from a completely different
Other side.
direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you've also mentioned philosophy. You inject philosophy into your teaching, which I love. You're always rooted in like yoga, like the big word yoga, right? Not just yoga asana. And asana, there's also philosophy, but also meditation. Meditation is a big, big part of your life. So tell us more. How did you find that? How did it become part of your life? And where does it go from here?
In 2015, Patrick, my teacher, said, "You need to start meditating." As part of your practice, not for any reason, but as a teacher, he said, "You need to start meditating." And I was like, "Okay, what do I do?" And I was introduced to a breath-led practice, and that has, for me, created the ground on which I stand as a teacher. And what I mean by that is that yoga at its essence, asana practice, but capital Y yoga at its essence, is the practice of meditation. It's the practice and the art of paying attention. And in asana, we're paying attention to the body, we're paying attention to the breath, and various things that are gaze or the bandhas or whatever, depending on your practice. But it is the practice of paying attention. And meditation is the most focused version of that. So sitting on a cushion and focusing on something is the sort of essential component. And I think that as a teacher, you have to practice asana and you have to meditate because it brings you home to the fundamental ground of the practice itself. And at least for me as a teacher, it gives me the it gives me an experience of what it's like to study myself, my mind, and that builds compassion towards myself and other people. And it really gives me the opportunity to share these teachings from a point of view of having done it. And I just think, I think that meditation is something that, as we get older, our body's not the same. And, you know, I've worked with many injuries and, you know, all sorts of things. And the meditation is the one practice that will always be there. So the sooner that we begin this practice, we know that this is a practice that is going to take us up until the moment that we die.
Yeah, that's deep.
That doesn't sound too grim. I hope that doesn't sound grim.
That's not as playful.
It's a beautiful thing.
Oh, wow. So I know that one of the big trips you take is to Kathmandu.
Yes.
And how did that come about?
I went there for the first time in 98 by myself. I just sort of got a bee in my bonnet that I wanted to go hiking in the Himalayas. And so I went and had a transformational experience walking through the Himalayas, hiking, carrying my pack and doing, I think I did 100 miles, and I came home feeling like $1,000,000. But the country itself, and in particular the valley, the Kathmandu Valley, just, there's something magical about it. And so when I was turning 50, I spent a whole year planning a big birthday party in Kathmandu. And, you know, we lived in Asia, so it wasn't too far. It was a couple-hour flight, but I had 70 people flying in. It was going to be a big thing. I had arranged this incredible party. And then the earthquake happened.
Oh,
So I had to cancel the party, which was fine. But it was a couple of years later that I was actually meditating in meditation, and I thought, oh my God, you know, what I planned for my birthday party should be a yoga retreat. And I was like, aha. So I did that, and I've been doing it ever since. So it's this opportunity to be in some place that is the confluence. So Kathmandu is the confluence of Hinduism and Buddhism. You have more Buddhist pilgrims outside of Tibet than anywhere else in the world, and the largest Buddhist temple or stupa in the world outside of Tibet, as I understand it. And you also have this river that runs from the Himalayas down to India and becomes the Ganges. But when it's in Nepal, it's the Bagmati. And so there you have a Hindu temple where it's a pilgrimage site for cremation and pilgrimage. So you have bodies burning and a lot of, it's very intense. And culturally, in all of my travels, there are a few countries where you could be dropped in and really know this is the only place in the world this could be. And that's Nepal for me. It really is very, very unique and very beautiful and hectic and crazy and ancient. And it's got all these things. So this is the place that I've been going back to again and again on retreat. And my retreat is coming up in October.
yes, this October, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned that's like right in the middle of like the joining of like or where Hinduism and Buddhism, there's two strong influences equally in
Yes.
there. And when we really understand the roots of yoga, capital Y yoga, there are just as strong, perhaps even equal influences of
Yes.
both into the
Yes.
yoga practice.
Yes.
And it's interesting, probably interesting to see it from two different perspectives, right, coming together.
Yeah. And it's present in daily life.
Yeah.
You know, you in Kathmandu, you're walking among buildings that were built in the 1500s, that are still being used to this day. So it doesn't feel like you're walking among dead monuments. You're walking in this extremely vibrant culture where there's ritual everywhere. So there's Buddhist ritual and Hindu ritual, and it's really one of the most vibrant places I've been to in the
Wow,
world.
amazing. So you have the annual retreat. I know this next one is coming up in October, and for our viewers, you can look down at the description below, and you can find Jen's information on where you can find her and information on her retreat to Kathmandu, and also her other retreats that she runs here in Texas, as well as a teacher training you did recently in Tokyo. So you're just all over the place, and you seem to love Asia. So tell us about your Tokyo teacher training.
Well, last year I had two trainings, two 200-hour trainings. One was based in Hong Kong and one was based in Tokyo. So I made way too many trips to Asia last year. I think I went back and forth 7 times. But yeah, I'm hopefully we'll have another teacher training coming up in Tokyo in 20 late 24 or 25.
Okay.
And I would love to put a teacher training on the schedule in Austin
Yeah.
because I think really there are a lot of teacher trainings here. There are a lot of teacher trainings everywhere. But what I bring to the table in the mix of who I've studied with and the time that I've put in and my lived experience, because I think that's really kind of a major part of when you study with someone. The decades that they put in practice and living the practice, I think no matter who they are, you're benefiting from their experience. So I'm hoping that there'll be something that I can offer in Austin as well.
Yeah, we'll look on putting one of those together here at Pure Yoga in Texas. It
Pure
is
Yoga, Texas.
Pure Yoga, Texas. Yes, and you mentioned that you were so fortunate. I think a lot of our yoga journeys are influenced by just randomness, right? It's a random walk. And your walk was able to go through Hong Kong at a time where yoga was really flourishing, and you had all of these different yoga teachers, as you said, pass through, and many of them, and you gave me a list of them, some significant ones, just a handful, and they're all like practitioners of 30, 40 years who are
Yeah.
coming through and imparting their roots of knowledge that go back to many of them to studying directly with Iyengar.
Yeah.
A lot of your teachings and learnings come pretty much straight from the source. That's what I love about your teaching. I can always trust that it's pure.
Yoga.
Yep, it's pure yoga.
Pure yoga.
So, how about any advice that you could give to new teachers? We've got a whole new generation of teachers that are coming through the 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 channels. What advice would you give?
I think the value in studying within a lineage, whether that's Ghosh, Iyengar, Ashtanga, Forrest. I think that there's something that's time tested about these lineages, and the value of really studying deeply this library of poses, whatever your poses are. If you're teaching 26 and 2, know how to teach triangle inside and out. If you're going to be teaching an alignment class, understand downward dog as deeply as you can, and then embody those practices. And with that, do the practice. You've got to practice. If as a yoga teacher, if you are not practicing, you're not feeding yourself. And there's a balance of taking on the practices, experiencing the practices, doing the work in order to energetically teach. I think that those are the two main things. Know your subject and do it.
Mm-hmm. Yay.
Yeah.
Yahoo. All right. I couldn't agree with you more, Jen. And that was a fantastic, fantastic yoga talk. I really love your dedication, your devotion to your practice, I love that you are into the philosophy in your teachings, that you meditate every day. I mean, you are a living, shining example of what pure yoga is, right? And we've got you right here in Austin. I'm very thankful that you're here with us and practicing and teaching with us. And I look forward to seeing you in the hot or the not hot room, either way.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you because you guys have made a community and a studio that is so lovely and warm and welcoming and full of dedicated students. And that it's really it's a joy. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jen. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye bye.